Good morning. I had to dig through my emails to find the link. Sorry.
That's always the way, isn't it? Well, welcome. I'm glad you could
Thank
join
you.
us. And I think now, what subject area were you in, Lita?
Indigenous studies.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Oh man, I think there's a lot of opportunities for OER development in Indigenous studies for sure. So perhaps a
Awesome.
little less out there in existing resources than there are in some other fields, but the possibilities are really, really endless. So
Excellent.
good. Okay, well, we'll get started. So I was going to talk today about finding and evaluating open educational resources. We're a small enough group here that I'm absolutely happy for you to just sort of jump in if you have a question or something you'd like to share. I'm sure some of you have been looking at these resources and have found neat things or problematic things, and I'd be happy to hear about those. So we'll get started here. I'm sure by now you are very familiar with the idea of open educational resources. So teaching, learning, and research resources created with the intention of being freely available to users anywhere. So that's a pretty basic definition. I like it because it's very broad. It doesn't constrict or restrict us in any way. As you know, open textbooks are kind of the thing that is discussed the most, I think, but they're merely one facet of open educational resources. And when I think of someone like Lindsay in creative technologies, wow, the possibilities are really endless, and the label of textbook would be very limiting in your field. So when we talk about open educational resources, here are some of the things that I've seen. So course materials, and you'll often see there's sites where Merlot, I think, is one. Other sites where you can find people who have created a syllabus for a course, or a course plan that share those materials. Of course, our famous open textbooks. Videos are increasingly becoming a developed and shared open educational resource. They were a little slow to take off because they can be pretty they demand a lot of time and resources in terms of doing them well, editing, that kind of thing. Lesson plan software, and I'm sure Daryl's familiar with that idea, open software. I think a lot of the idea of open educational resources sort of evolved from the software environment. And then games, a lot of people are developing games using those as teaching tools as well in certain subject areas. And the benefits for faculty, increased student retention. It really gives you control over your content as a faculty member. So if you've been using a textbook and there's a chapter that you don't like, or it doesn't convey what you want it to convey, the open educational resource or open textbook gives you a way around that issue. You can cut that chapter out. You can write your own replacements. You can find a replacement from another textbook. So it really does sort of give you a freedom that you don't have with sort of publisher prepared textbooks. It can extend your academic profile. Some open textbooks, open educational resources are used by hundreds of different institutions for different classes. And I certainly think, when I think of this, I think of Joan Wagner, who has just retired, but she was in nursing here at U of R, and she did an open textbook through the open textbook program, and it was on leadership in nursing, and it has been widely used, and actually she was asked to grant permission for it to be translated into French. So it's being used not only in English language settings, but now also in French as well. And then, you can make it more relevant and engaging for your students. So again, if there's things in those textbooks that you're thinking, this is so boring, it's boring me and I'm into this subject, you can do something about it and try to liven it up a bit. And the benefits for students, low cost or free. They're easy to find and access, and they're more customized and relevant. And I would also add, I think this can have a big impact on student learning. There's been studies done, and students increasingly just aren't buying textbooks. When the textbooks are expensive, or when the student budget is crunched, textbooks are one of the first things they cut, and they resort to a bunch of different measures. One is borrowing from the library. We do try to purchase copies of we have a special fund where we purchase copies of textbooks used in classes, but again, you can borrow that for 3 hours, a loan period, and then if it's a big class, there's somebody else waiting for that textbook. After your reserve period is over, you have to return it and someone else wants it. So it's some access, but it's limited access. I also talked to groups of students who have pooled their resources to purchase textbooks. So you get 5 students who each pitch in $20 to purchase a textbook. And again, at least they have access to it, but they don't have consistent access to it when they might need it. So you really do, there really is a potential to improve learning outcomes for students as well. And of course, to be an open educational resource, it must meet the following, the 5 R's. So reuse, in that the content can be reused in unaltered form. Retain, so that users have the right to make, archive, and own copies of the content. They can revise it, and we'll talk a bit more about revision. They can remix it. I think remixing is a particularly exciting option because it isn't as intensive as creating your own open textbook, but you're not constrained to what someone else has done. You can kind of create what you want there, and then redistribute. So, you know, that's a key tenet, of course, of open textbooks and open education resources, is that the content is available for others to use and to redistribute, to customize as they see fit. So that's sort of an overview. And then I think you probably covered most of that yesterday in your sessions. I want to talk about types of open education resources and some starting points for finding these types of resources. So, and there's different types of repositories that contain this content. So here are a few I've listed that are some of the big ones that are repositories of a mixed content. And so by mixed, I mean open textbooks, you know, videos, course plans, all kinds of different material, not exclusively textbooks. So the first one I've listed here is Solar, and like I said, I'm happy to send these links to you, or the slides with these links to you afterwards. And Solar comes to us from BC Campus, and you may have heard that everyone else in Canada, I would say, is kind of jealous of BC with respect to their open educational resource development. The government of BC has put quite a bit of money into their program, their development of resources there. They also have a very strong system in BC Campus for coordinating and collaborating among all of their post-secondary institutions. So the end result is they've kind of emerged as the OER hero in Canada for the moment, but luckily we all benefit because, of course, a central tenet of OERs is that they are shared and openly available. So you can go in and browse open resources in here. And actually, the first thing that comes up is just statistics using technology. Depending on what kind of aspect of statistics you were interested in, you might find something here. And you can see they've kind of broken things down a bit. There's different ways you can browse the material. If you want to just limit to open textbooks, there's the option to do so there. And then, of course, you can do your searches to see what kinds of materials are available. So introduction to business statistics, introductory statistics. I knew statistics was one that I had seen quite a few existing open educational resources. And as you can see here too, some of these they've been around a while, and I would say in a lot of cases kind of proven performers as open textbooks. For example, statistics using technology, here we've got a 3rd edition. So this has been around for a while, and the original authors have been updating it. Likely others have also been reusing that content and updating it as well. One thing I like about, you can see here is an introductory business statistics with interactive spreadsheets for Canadian edition. That's one thing I like about Solar or BC Campus textbooks, is that a lot of them have been Canadianized, and the importance of that depends on your discipline. But certainly, if you're looking at anything to do with economics, it would be more meaningful for you, for your students, if things are in Canadian terms, Canadian dollars. I work a lot with public policy students, and the policy environment is very different in Canada than it is in the States, with respect to things like healthcare. So if I was going to be looking for works that are sort of Canadianized, BC Campus would be my first stop in that journey. So same thing with measurements. You know, if you're in mathematics, that kind of thing, you're going to want something probably that uses the metric system. And so you'd be wanting to look for a Canadianized version of an open educational resource. Another site here is the OER Commons, which is another big collection of open educational resources, and they include textbooks, courses, ancillary materials. So one thing we found is that initially, faculty were somewhat reluctant to use open educational resources because a lot of textbooks in some disciplines come with the full package. And some of you, I'm sure, have experienced this, where as an instructor, you get the test, you get the textbook, you'll get PowerPoint slides that correspond to that textbook, you'll get banks of test questions, you might get some lesson outlines, lesson plans. So textbook publishers have sort of been packaging some of these ancillary materials with their textbooks, which has made them quite attractive to faculty members, because let's face it, everyone is busy, so that can help you. So with open education resources, gradually there's been an awareness that that's a barrier for faculty adopting existing OERs. So more and more we're seeing OERs that are created, and in addition to just the textbook, you're seeing that there are, let's go down to physical science. You're seeing that there are also ancillary materials available that certainly make it more user-friendly for you as a faculty member. So, you know, I go in here to look at Introduction to Chemistry, and I have an open textbook, and also available here are lecture notes. I scroll down further, measurements in the laboratory, and there's activities and lab materials in addition to a textbook. So you increasingly find that you get additional types of resources that are included in these packages that do make them more user-friendly. So that's something else to keep in mind as you're looking at open educational resources. But this OER Commons is a large site, and there's definitely some overlap between these sites. So, you know, there will be things you find in one that you find in another, but each one also contains fairly unique items as well. And you do have options, you know, in terms of limiting to your subject area, the type of material you're looking for, education level, so graduate students, undergraduate students, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of options there in terms of limiting your search when you go in there to kind of get a sense of what's available in your subject area. And just one more I'll highlight in terms of these sort of bigger databases of OERs of various forms and flavors is Merlot. And Merlot is based in California, hence Merlot, the wine. And it's a curated collection of online teaching, learning, and faculty development services. And it's big. Merlot is very big. There's, I think if we go in there, it'll show us what their sort of number of items, discrete items is. And it's a little different too, and that it is very curated. So if you want to deposit some material you've created in Merlot, you actually submit it and they can accept it or deny it. So there is kind of a process there, a vetting process that could be regarded as problematic, but can also be regarded as helpful. So you can see here, as I said, it shows you there's almost 100,000 learning resources available in Merlot. Kind of breaks it down, you know, and worldwide people are contributing materials to Merlot. I'm just curious, let's try Creative Technologies, Creative Commons. Case studies, I should mention for anyone who's in business as well. Some of these search tools, so things like Merlot, do have some case studies. And I know finding case studies for business admin and other areas can be quite a vexing undertaking at times. And certainly some of these repositories are good places for people to, instructors to look for case studies to use in your teaching. Let's see here. I was just thinking of Lindsay and that that creative technologies kind of end. And, you know, as we go through, I think we need to refine this search more. You know, MIT World Series videos on creativity, the mind, machines, and mathematics, and so on. So nothing that jumps out at me immediately as extraordinary, but I think we would go in and we would refine that search a bit, narrow it down, and see what we could find there. And Merlot would be a good place to find material of all different, you know, in different formats. So outside of that traditional textbook format as well. And as you can see, there's options here to limit. So Merlot is not just university level. There's also some materials for younger kids. And then you can specify what it is you're interested in. So, so that's what Merlot looks like. So those are a few, like I said, of mixed types of content. And then when you get specifically to open textbooks, I imagine Isaac has told you about the University of Regina OER by subject directory. So Isaac and Arliss have put together a directory that kind of pulls together some open educational resources and aligns them to what subject areas are taught at the University of Regina. So they've tried to make this, you know, provide a good first stop for what kinds of resources are out there in subjects that we're teaching here at the University of Regina. So you can see as we go down, they've broken it down by our faculties here at the university, and then further by departments. So that is a good place to go. You might even start with that subject directory and see what you find in your area of interest, and then expand your search out from there if open textbooks are what you're interested in. And then BC Campus Open Textbooks. So we were at Solar, which is kind of the bigger portal to not only open textbooks, but also other types of resources from BC. But you can also go directly to the textbook collection if you're wanting to look specifically for a textbook. And BC Campus has done something innovative in that, let's see here if I can find an example. Okay, here's one, Histories of Indigenous Peoples in Canada, and you can see that it's been reviewed. So BC Campus has had a program, I assume they're still doing it, but certainly up until very recently they have a program where they will, they want their materials to be peer reviewed as well, to give others who might adopt them further confidence in those materials. So they were offering, I believe they still do, offer an honorarium to faculty members to review textbooks written by others. So if you're if you're a professor in Indigenous studies, you could indicate to BC Campus, I'm willing to review this book. And I think they were giving $200 or something as an honorarium to anyone who stepped forward and offered to review textbooks. So kind of helps with that sort of peer review element that, you know, people are concerned could be missing from an open textbook. You know, the publishers certainly emphasize that that's a value that they add to an open textbook, but there's been significant progress made in terms of encouraging people to peer review materials as well. So, and then also, so here we can see there's a review here. It gives us the name of the reviewer, the score that they've assigned it, and then they sort of give their review. So that's another thing to look for when you're investigating resources that you might want to adapt or adopt for your own teaching. And you can also see here that this is not only have the creators presumably used this work, but others have adopted this material as well. So you can, you know that it's being used. This is another example. Bettina, who I'm sure some of you know, worked on this financial empowerment, personal finance for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. It's a brilliant textbook, in my opinion, and it's not just a textbook. When you go in there, it's a textbook, but there's also video interviews with elders, for example, talking about sort of Indigenous concepts or conceptualizations of financial issues. And so it really is kind of a strong multimedia work. I really thought it was an excellent job. And you can see with this one, there's also supplementary materials available. So if I go in and take a look, we can see there's a review of that, and let's go in here. So you can see she's pulled out the interviews from elders. So if you wanted just to use those as opposed to the whole textbook, she's also done PowerPoint slides for key takeaway points, as well as by chapter. So you can go in and see that kind of material. In some cases, you'll find with a open textbook that has ancillary materials, if there's something like an exams or test banks, it will tell you that those types of ancillary resources are available, but you'll need to contact, and it will provide contact information to get in touch with the author of the material to get those items. And that's just so that they're not freely available on the web, and every student in your class has already seen those exam questions before you turn them into an exam. It's an effort to kind of control who has access to that material. So that's the kind of thing you would find through BC. OpenStax is interesting. It's been a big one for a number of years. It's through Rice University. My understanding is that it is coming to a close. So right now their content is all still available here, but come later this year, they're going to move it to the Internet Archive. So I don't think they'll be adding new work to this, but the works that have been created will continue to be available. And really, I find with OpenStax, it's a kind of the fundamental subject areas. You do have good luck in OpenStax finding that type of material. I imagine the OpenStax material will also continue to be made available in some of the other repositories as well, because it is picked up by others. I suspect the funding is always the thing with these, so I suspect that they've run to the end of their funding cycle with their current funder. And I also wanted to mention Project Gutenberg. Project Gutenberg is, well, first of all, I'll say I did a BA and an MA in English literature at the University of Regina before I went and did my library science degree. And we were forever having this problem, even in the era of print versions of books, where when we were studying the classics, everyone would have a different edition. Right. So the bookstore would have an edition of Wuthering Heights, and then there would be secondhand bookstores that had copies of different editions, and there would be people with older siblings that had different editions. And it was forever this struggle of, okay, let's look at page 58. Oh, in your edition, it's this page. In your edition, it's this page. So what Project Gutenberg is it's an effort to make books available that have run out of copyright. So they're no longer protected by copyright, so they can be freely shared. And to my mind, the benefit is, I mean, students don't have to buy a copy of this, but you can also identify, okay, this is the edition we're using, and everyone has access to it, and everyone will be on the same page when you're looking at or discussing a particular work. So, so that's the classics is what you're finding in Project Gutenberg. So that tends to be useful for, particularly for people in English and history, some of those subjects. There's some social sciences type material in here as well. So that's Project Gutenberg. Before I move on to some other tools for multimedia content, does anyone have any questions for me? Lindsay, yes.
Hi, I actually have a question about Project Gutenberg because I sometimes use that in my classes, and I know that I've always used the projectgutenberg.org, which I think is based in the States, and then I've gone to the Canadian one, and there's usually a sort of big discussion about like what can be used in Canada versus the States. And I'm just curious if you have any insight into that. Like, is there a big difference between what's open access in the States and Canada?
There has traditionally been some difference in that up until recently, or even maybe right now, but changing later this year, Canada has had a practice of copyright has extended for 50 years beyond the end of the author. And in the US, it's been 70 years beyond the death of the author. And then just in the last year or two, there was a new, the name of it escapes me, but a Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement signed. And as part of that agreement, copyright in Canada is going to be extended to 70 years past the death of the author. So while there were it used to be that it was 50 years here, so there was more material available, eligible to be opened up in Canada, you're going to find, if it hasn't happened now, very soon, you're going to find there's a lot less difference because that's being standardized. And let me tell you, the education community and the copyright folks have really fought hard against that change, but to no avail. It was part of a sort of a larger political discussion, I guess. So does that help, Lindsay?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions before we look at some of these other tools here? Isaac, did you have anything to add right now, or?
No.
Oh, okay. So now I thought we'd talk a little bit about multimedia. So we've looked at those repositories that sort of span different types of resources. We looked at some open textbook specific resources. I get a lot of questions from people, people who are working on open educational resources, handouts that they're preparing for students, but also presentations, class slides, presentations for conferences. I get a lot of questions from people who are looking for images, video content that they can use without having to worry about copyright restrictions. So I thought I would just highlight a few things here that I find particularly useful. So first is a Creative Commons search, or Openverse as it's known. And this allows you to, all of a sudden everything is opening up in the wrong screen. This allows you to browse through over 600 million items to reuse. And there's images here, there's videos, there's all kinds of content. And this is kind of run in concert with the Creative Commons license. And I think yesterday Christina talked about Creative Commons. And so when things have a Creative Commons license applied to them, then most of them eventually also find their way into Openverse. And then you can search in here you could search in here for content. Just search something very straightforward here. So when I search Regina, of course, I'm getting everyone named Regina, but I have done this. If I'm looking for a picture of our city, you can see there's historical photos have been added, and then lots of other images of the city. So you can find, you can search for just about anything here, and anything you find in this database has a Creative Commons license applied to it. So that means you can use the content, give credit for the content, but you don't need to worry so much about copyright and, getting permission to reproduce this material. You could even reproduce these depending on the specifics of the copyright license that has been applied. You could even reproduce these in a book if you wished. So, or an article. You see here, here's one that, has a Creative Commons license, and it's a Creative Commons by, which again, I think Christina probably talked about yesterday. And that means that you can use this so long as you give attribution. You acknowledge the, the source of this image. So you could use it in a book that you're selling, or in PowerPoint slides, or whatever, a website you're creating. Really, the possibilities are endless so long as you acknowledge that as a source. So that's a pretty powerful resource for finding. It's largely images, but you do find some video content in there as well. Vimeo is a video sharing website. I imagine some of you have used Vimeo before, and it is video content, but it gives you some pretty clear options in terms of limiting your searches to items that are reusable. So if you're looking for content content, video content that you could insert into, embed in an educational resource that your students are using. So let's see. If you're working on a nursing textbook or a nursing resource and you're wanting to find information about reducing blood pressure or using a blood pressure monitor, for example, you can find all kinds of content in here that then you can reuse depending on the license that's available. So if I go over on the left side here, I get options and I can specify what licenses I want. So if I'm going to use it in an online textbook or an online course, I would say I'd want a CC BY license. So something that I'm free to use so long as I acknowledge the source. And when I do that, you can see then it limits my search results and gives me still a lot of different resources that I'm then free to use. So I find Vimeo to be quite a good tool for when you're looking for videos. And I chose something sort of mundane and sciencey, blood pressure, but when I think of someone like Lindsay, there's also a lot of creative materials up here. It's not just sort of all all dull practicality. So there may well be some very creative materials, creative resources on here that would be useful for you in a teaching setting as well. And then Flickr, I imagine most of you are familiar with Flickr. It's a big photo sharing website, and you do find some absolutely extraordinary photos on Flickr. And I should come up with some more exciting searches to do here. First, here's a good lesson. If you spell it wrong, it doesn't find anything. There's nothing like typing with an audience to make your deficiencies very clear. So you can see I searched University of Regina and got all kinds of different images here. And then I can specify again what kind of license I want to use. So I've said all Creative Commons licenses, and then there's lots of content here that I could put in a presentation or a book or an article or whatever I was wanting to do. So, and there's millions and millions of photos on here, and some of them are really very, very striking. So they can be very useful for sort of jazzing up some of the course material that you create. And then Google Images also gives you the option to limit your search to Creative Commons licenses. I have found this to be not entirely reliable. I was practicing my violin this morning, so let's look at violin. So I can say tools, and I can go to usage rights, and I can specify Creative Commons licenses. And I typically find when I'm looking for materials, if I find something on Google image search, I will oftentimes then click through to the actual site where the image resides to verify its status, whether it is in fact Creative Commons or available for reuse. I find sometimes Google there's some images where I just do not know how they've reached the conclusion that they are freely available or have a Creative Commons license. So I think with Google Scholar or Google Images, my advice is sort of trust but verify if you're using images you found that way. So, but it can be a good source as well. So any questions about that? Images, multimedia type stuff before we move on to a little bit about evaluating resources. So you found a promising resource. What do you do next? And this is when you need to do some evaluation. So first of all, you need to have a look at the license. And I won't go into this because as I said, I believe Christina talked about it yesterday. But the first step, I think, with any of these, I say open textbook, but open educational resources, is to make sure that you could do with it what you want to do with it. And if you can't, then move on and look at something else and work through that process. So, and in most cases for education, educational resources, you're just looking, you're not too worried about a commercial use, that kind of thing. So, but just make sure that whatever your intended use is allowable under the type of license that has been assigned to that specific resource. And, you can see the most free is that Creative Commons attribution license, where your only obligation is to indicate who is the owner, who created that particular resource. And then there are more restrictive Creative Commons licenses. And again, it really probably most cases for us doesn't matter, because if you're creating an open textbook or open educational resource, you're not looking to sell it anyway. So, you can use materials that have that non-commercial type license limitation as well. So, but as I said, I'll leave that there. I imagine you've talked about that. And then I have this OER checklist, and I'll send this out to you. I'll send it to Isaac after maybe, and he can send it out to you as well as a resource. But I find this to be kind of a good checklist for stepping you through looking at resources and determining whether or not you might want to adapt them or adopt them for your own use. So that supplementary material, I think, is important. And then everything in terms of the content, is it accurate? Is it error-free? Is it unbiased? And that's where, particularly in the case of a textbook, you may find that if something's been peer reviewed, those things will have been identified as well. And then you want to make sure that the writing is clear and understandable. So, and again, this depends a bit on who it is you're teaching. If it's first year undergraduates, you need something that is written at the level that's accessible to them. If you're working with a class of graduate students, of course, that's going to be different. So I just thinking about sort of that accessibility, understandability from the point of view of the types of students that you're going to have in a class using this. Are there major errors or omissions? And I've seen a few people over the years adopt open textbooks and add a chapter, where they felt that there was something that was missing, or it was a textbook that was written from something other than a Canadian perspective. And so they felt there was a major omission, and they corrected that. They created that particular content themselves. Peer review, we've talked about that. Who's it written by? Most times these are, if you're going through some of the sites I've looked at today, it's, a textbook, a course outline is going to be written by someone with an affiliation to a university or college. There's not a lot of people out there with spare time on their hand looking to deviously create open educational resources. There's no money to be made in it. So that makes it fairly unappealing to people who might be scammers. And then ancillary resources. So again, think about, and that doesn't necessarily disqualify you from using a resource, the unavailability of ancillary resources, but you need to just kind of think about your teaching style and whether that's important to you, what time you have available to create these things on your own if they're not available. And then relevance, so is it up to date? And oftentimes you'll find, like that statistics book we were looking at was a 3rd edition. So it doesn't hurt if you do find something that you think you want to use in a class, just to make sure that you have the most recent edition that's available of that work. So there'll be a 1st and a 2nd edition of that statistics textbook that probably haven't disappeared from these sites. So do make sure that you're starting with the most up-to-date version. And again, does it cover clearly material? Does it address class objectives? These are pretty common, depending, it doesn't matter if you're using an open textbook or a more traditional published textbook. The audience, and then that Canadian perspective as well. In my previous job as a medical librarian, I worked with some dietitians at the health region who were developing an open educational resource. And, they were able to pull some material that had been created by others, but they had to do a lot of work because all of the measurements were in incorrect systems. They needed to metric it all and do quite a bit of revision that way to make it useful for their peers in the health region. And is it culturally relevant, using examples that are inclusive of a variety of folks? And I think this is something important to keep in mind too. I think we're seeing more and more awareness of this as people are writing textbooks that need to be inclusive, but it's certainly not a given. So I would take a look at the textbook with that in mind, and also think about how you might expand that in some way. You know, there may be sections that you want to add or revise a bit to make them more inclusive. So I would encourage you to do that. Licensing, so Christina spoke about that yesterday. And there's always also this considerations around traditional knowledge. You know, you need to be careful that the material that you're including and sharing, you have the right to include and share. So with this, I think about Bettina doing her textbook where she interviewed elders. You know, she interviewed those elders and, you know, they knew she was making a textbook, but she had to make it very clear to them that she was also going to be making this textbook openly available for others in other institutions and around the world to access this material, because she didn't want to be sort of giving away traditional knowledge or teachings that really weren't hers to share to that broad audience. So I think an awareness around those issues is very important as well. Is the text easily readable? Can you divide it into sections? That's helpful for readability for students. It's also helpful when you're assigning readings for specific weeks. You know, if it's kind of in logical sections or chunks, that tends to work better for teaching. And are they presented in a logical and clear fashion? I do know of someone who reordered, you know, they used an existing textbook, but they reordered some of the chapters because to them it didn't flow properly or according to the way that they were planning to teach the material. So, and then this table here is just gives you a bit of an idea of what kinds of resources are useful to you depending on what you're going to be doing with open educational resources. So obviously adopting an open educational resource that's been created by someone else is the least resource intensive. As long as you have the go ahead to do this, away you go. You can take someone else's open textbook and use it and you're good. When you start to get into extensive adaptation or creating a new open textbook, you get into needing more support. And certainly I'm sure you've seen Isaac's emails about the open textbook program at the university. And so the open textbook program is a mechanism for the university and its government designated funding. So for the university and the government to provide some of these kinds of supports for people who want to take on a more involved project. So, you know, do you need a teaching release? Do you need technical support, copy editing, design support, those kinds of things? And those are the types of supports that can be provided through the open textbook program, depending on what you're doing. But I would I guess the ultimate word is just kind of caution to make sure that if you take on one of these larger scale revisions, adaptations, or creation, to make sure that you have access to the resources that you need, because I think otherwise it could be a frustrating experience to go into it not fully aware and under-resourced. Another thing I wanted to mention, just because I saw it so clearly, was a number of years ago, the University of Regina, through the open textbook program, made a Cree textbook available, teaching Cree, and there were also audio recordings available. That's still available. It's used for classes. But I was really struck at the time, after it was openly released, we were looking at some of the stats on how often that material was accessed and where people were accessing it from. And my mind was absolutely blown that it was being accessed from all over the place, but particularly Western Canada, you know, and villages and towns and, you know, places with no university. And, you know, maybe some of those are remote students, but some of them were just people in a community who were interested in that resource and that topic. So I think that's an underestimated element of open educational resources is, we talk about them in terms of students and saving students money, and but some of them really find their way into the community and become a significant tool for the community as well. So, depending on what your area of interest is, what you're working on, there's also the possibility to make a significant social contribution by developing, sharing an open educational resource. I'm a fan, in case you can't tell, of open educational resources. So that's what I wanted to talk about, but I want to know questions. What else? What other questions do you have for me? Oh my gosh, I was that thorough. Well, if no one has any questions, I won't hold you up here, but I will, as I said, send my slides and that checklist sheet to Isaac so that he can share them with you. I'd be happy to have you use them. And Isaac's probably the most knowledgeable person at our university with respect to open educational resources. But if there's anything I can help you with, if you're looking for assistance identifying existing open educational resources, I would be certainly happy to help you with that. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like some sort of one-on-one help, and we can talk more specifically about what it is you're looking for. So. All right, well, I'll let you go because I know you have other sessions today. Isaac, was there anything you wanted to add before we close here?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, thanks and have a good day. Enjoy the rest of the boot camp.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.